Hi folks, we're Taskless today, your pushback channel. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the issue of childcare places. So childcare outside of the home, and so there could be sort of, kindergartens type places, or even places where recently, not newborn per se, but say after a few months, babies that are born could go into some sort of daycare thing while the mother or the parents are at work, or even places for childcare, say before and after school, for parents who start work early or or come back later, and maybe there's some sort of childcare facilities maybe run out of the school itself, or a nearby childcare centre. So the claim is that there's nowhere near enough places for children, and that these places are quite expensive and are beyond the reach of most parents unless they're getting some sort of a government credit or a government funded centre or a handout of some sort, from the government. So is it a government issue to solve? Is it an issue for local government or federal government? If education is a federal issue, then there's a lot of people arguing that therefore childcare in the overall sense should also be a federal issue. Is it something that's managed through federal tax codes, as in tax credits? And so there's a lot of is it a state issue and so on. So there's a lot of argy-bargy going on about whose responsibility is it. And I noticed in the presidential or vice presidential debate, one of the supposed moderators asking the question, they put up the question, what about childcare, asserting it's a crisis and this sort of thing, and everything that the left pushes is a crisis, or so it seems. So let's have a look at childcare. Now, why wasn't childcare, or lack of it, or whatever, why wasn't that an issue years ago? Why wasn't it an issue when I was a kid, for example? Why wasn't it an issue when, we first started having children? And let's just go, because there's a few things have happened over time. Now, as is often the case with this, the situation we find ourselves in today developed through a number of factors that are all sort of moving and spinning around in space, and they all coalesce, and they're the forces that shape particular outcomes. And then one day we wake up and realize, holy crap, there's not enough childcare places. But in fact, the build up to that, the forces that created that situation had been in play for a long time, and had all contributed to the situation of childcare, or lack of childcare out of the home, or out of the family home. So we need to just look at a few things there, and it's far more nuanced than may appear on the face of it. So when I was a kid, and this is, as far as I can tell, every other kid I knew at the time, even I remember at 4 years old, I would walk to the preschool thing, and walk home again, and no one thought of pedophiles. There's not monsters under the cupboard or in the closet. There's not Hitler isn't running around trying to grab you or something like that. So it's there wasn't any concerns, and or if there were concerns, nowhere near the thing it is today. The next thing was that people didn't move around anywhere near as much as they do now. So everybody in the town or the village, and as a kid, I lived in big cities, small villages and towns, so I had a bit of a cross section. but other than the big cities, and which I didn't come across until I was almost a teenager, the sort of villages that, or even suburbs of cities, the population was quite sedentary, didn't move around. There wasn't this mass sort of transient population of people coming and going and so on. Everybody knew everybody in the streets. So, and you were told as a kid, well, if you've got any trouble or any problems, go up to Mrs. Jones or Mrs. Smith or whatever up the street or on the corner, and you go, and there were also friends in the neighbourhood. Not all mothers worked, and some were at home, so there was always adults around, adults that you knew and that had lived there for years or even generations, for goodness sakes. So there was a certain social stability in things that doesn't exist now, particularly in the cities. Now, more and more people move to the cities, so you have a much lower and smaller population in the country towns or the smaller towns and villages than you had. And again, the population moving around, retirees moving in that are newbies have just parachuted into the area and so on. So that stable population. The other thing that there was very little of, I remember in the street that I lived in, there was only one household where the mother had been divorced previously and married again, and she was viewed with, I'm not sure suspicion is the right word, but that she was morally just a peg or two below the rest of the people there. But there was in a street of 100 people or something, wherever it was, there's one there that was from divorce. So divorce was quite rare. Not that it didn't happen, it was quite rare. The other thing was that people had bigger families. So everyone had brothers and sisters, typically that lived in the same area. Again, people didn't move around so much, or not as much as they do now. So if one person was working, then there was always a brother or sister nearby, or even a cousin who could look after the children for a day or two, and or people. I remember there were people helping each other. I remember some family that we knew that they were going overseas or something like that. They had to go somewhere, and so would we look after their kid? Could their kid stay with us for a week or two, whatever it was, and that sort of thing wasn't really that unusual. And there was, given that everybody knew everybody, and there was none of this doubt or suspicion type thing of it being someone you didn't know or someone of strange habit, or you knew this person, you knew their parents and grandparents, and you knew their other family members, so the kid could stay. And again, that wasn't an unusual thing. I remember myself, if my folks were going somewhere and that I was left with somebody, so you can stay at Mrs. Smith's up the road. That happened. And again, it wasn't unusual, it wasn't strange, and there wasn't a need to arrange private childcare places or anything like that. Now, there are times when my mother was working, and she was, and so I was told, well, you come home, and it's primary school. I'm 5, 6, 7 years old, whatever. You come home, you get yourself a cup of milk, and I was told to read books or to play with my toys, or there were kids in the street, and it depends, I suppose, the time of year, how cold it was, and so on. But that was just, you look after yourself. If you get hungry, make yourself a sandwich, or that type of thing. So you were, I won't say taught independence, but it was just assumed, you'll be fine. Just get yourself something to drink and play with your toys, and that's all. Or go and see, go and play with your mate Billy Bob down the road or something. And so that was how it was. So this idea that you had to be looked after, monitored, watched, special care and all this sort of thing, that didn't really come up, and I don't remember it being an issue. And I was fine taking care of myself. I didn't think about it. I didn't walk home from school thinking that there were going to be all sorts of monsters in the closet who were going to try and chase me. I didn't think about that. It didn't cross my mind. And as far as I'm aware, the folks didn't think that way either. So let's fast forward to, and these were developing sort of a series of processes that were, and things that were developing and coalescing and moving to a point of intersection and culmination and so on. So whereas sort of 1% of the population, certainly in the rural areas that I was in, 1% of the population were divorced. Now it's much higher. You're looking at close to 50% overall. So a lot more single mothers, and also, if you look at the black population of the United States, it's not unusual for a black woman, to have, by the time she's 30, to have 5 or 6 children, but all by different men. And so she works at the local takeout chicken shop, and who's going to look after the children? So are there childcare places for them? But that demand for childcare amongst white and black, by the way, divorce rates high, and out of wedlock births are high all around today. That need for childcare didn't exist then, so that's created a fresh and new demand for childcare places. It didn't exist certainly when I was a kid, or didn't exist previously. So that's a huge factor, which has again created a fresh market and demand for something that wasn't needed previously. So high divorce rates, out of wedlock births, and so on. Now there was a lot of social housing, and I remember this as a kid. So people who were doing it tough could go and live in for their whole lives, could get allocated social housing, and if they had a job, they would pay more rent, not commercial market rates, but they would pay more rent. I think you had to have a certain amount of children before they would do that. But nonetheless, that there was they had the social housing, and that took the pressure off, which meant that the woman, the mother, didn't need to work with this social housing thing. So she was always there to look after the children. And again, there was sort of neighbourhood mothers who and again, relatives and so on, bigger families in those days. Now, so single motherhood and out of wedlock births. The other thing is smaller families. So whereas you'd have brothers and sisters around the place, cousins that could do the looking after and the child minding and all that sort of stuff, or relatives, your parents, your grandparents, all that sort of thing. That's changed now. There are smaller families, and families don't live in the same place all their lives, as an intergenerational, that sort of stuff. People move around, so you can have somebody with, every family member pretty much lives in a different state, or even a different country, or a different part of the world, and so this idea that everyone's in the same area or the same street or the same suburb or a short drive away, that's also gone. So the wider family support infrastructure of childcare that was just a standard feature of those times years ago, that's gone as well. Now, obviously, women being encouraged or needing to work, standard of living, how are we going to pay the mortgage without 2 incomes? All those sorts of things. They also feed into the process, and there's plenty of women with children who have to be out the door at 7 o'clock in the morning, and they don't get back until 7 o'clock at night. Well, who's going to look after the children pre and post school? Or if the children are younger, still look after them all day. To feed them and to, all that sort of thing. Especially the younger children, change their nappies or diapers, as the Americans call it. And so that's also a difference, that women going out to work and not being able to work. Typically, women were, this was an interim thing, I suppose, but women with children, it was expected they would stay at home for 5 years. Even a working woman would say, 5 years, look after children. And then when the children started school, the women would get jobs where they could start work after the children that were at school, and could finish work when the children finished school. So they would always be there to look after the children outside of school hours. But that's changed now. So those casual jobs that were almost made specifically for women with children, younger children to look after, those jobs, not that they've gone entirely, but they don't seem to exist in anywhere the numbers that they used to. I remember that there was say things like grocery food store chains would have jobs, casual part-time sort of jobs, or offer jobs with those hours, almost as part of some wider social responsibility to be able to give women those jobs so that they could again be able to look after their children. That seems to have largely gone by the wayside, and I thought it was. And look back now, I thought that was a good thing. They get workers to do the work. The grocery store chain, for example, and the mothers get extra money, which is needed, like to pay the mortgage and whatever, and yet they're still available to look after the children before and after school, which means they don't need to pay for separate childcare and so on. So that seems to have gone by the wayside. Now, if I just people that there's a lady I know, she got divorced and probably creating problems that she didn't need to, but she got talked into by radical feminists, activists. She got talked into going after her ex-husband for he should pay for child support and he should pay all the childcare costs. Now, she then quite bravely picks a very expensive childcare place because she only wants the best for her children. But you got to pay for it, she says to the husband. Now, she wanted to, take on more responsibilities at work. That's fine, which meant she had to be out the door earlier and was coming back later. And for every hour you go past the sort of the cutoff point, then it's quite expensive for the childcare, and with two children. So he quite reasonably and rightly kicked up a fuss about this and said, well, hold on, I'm paying your child support and I take the children sort of every second week, and you want me to pay everything else as well. So because they were dragging him into court and kicking the crap out of him, he said, well, screw you, I won't work anymore. I'll just work in the underground economy, sweeping floors or mowing lawns or something like that. So he does that, and so then she loses all that source of income. Then she can't afford the childcare. But her parents live in another country. Her sister lives 1,000 miles away, interstate, and her brother's this and that, and the other sister, they're not on speaking terms, so and so on. So all the support infrastructure that she could be accessing isn't there. So she's got the option where she has to go and live in an area where she's got family support, but she doesn't want to do that, and so she's created a lot of her own problems there. But she's one of the people that makes the big noise. But there should be more childcare places, and the government should pay for it. It should all be free. But a lot of the things she could do to make her life much easier and the life of the children easier, she doesn't do. And so there are going to be individual cases where people are creating their own difficulties, and needlessly so. But when we put together all the things that happen, families moving every year, dislocation, divorce, the before and after, just before and after childcare at schools, your kids used to turn up early and sort of just play with each other at school, and the parents would drop them off. But then all it requires is one kid to be injured for whatever the reason, and then it's a big insurance claim, it's a big legal case, and little Susie dressed in pink fell over, and so this is and politicians make a big issue of it, and they want to show how much they care and all this sort of thing. So they have to have big, expensive insurance, and then there has to be, the insurance requires that there must be 2 adults on duty, a minimum of 2 adults on duty, and so the school says, okay, well, if you want childcare, fine, but given the insurance cost, we've got to roster people on and pay them overtime, then we're going to have to charge you for the, parents are going to have to pay for this. there'll be a price for it. Parents have to pay for this before and after school. So suddenly it's now become expensive. That didn't used to be the case. There were kids, I remember this at school, at primary school, where they'd be dropped off early, and because the parents were doing whatever, they'd be dropped off early, and they just sort of hung around and played, and sometimes they'd fall out of the tree or they'd skin their knees or something. Yeah, that sort of stuff. But it didn't turn into some massive legal case. That's different now. This idea that children have to be watched and cared and monitored, and insurance and this and that, and protected from everything and anything and everything. That's also a different sentiment today, which builds in cost and overhead to something that otherwise didn't have cost. So there's a whole lot of issues have gone into making a very different landscape today, and I don't know what can be done about it. Is it something that the government should provide? Should there be tax credits, or do we need to look at how society used to be ordered, and when childcare was not needed, to a situation today where how society is ordered now under globalist control, of course, and how childcare is now supposed to be one of the most pressing issues that faces the entire Western world. And maybe it is, but there's a lot more conversations needed, and it's not as simple as just childcare is needed, the government should pay for it. It's just not that simple. You've been a task today at your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.